because we think it's an important topic. I am bisexual. There needs to be more representation. So we're happy to say that volume 2 is more than double the size. So we have even more stories than volume 1.
Hello, and welcome to another video edition of the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. I'm Ryan Claytor, and I have a Patreon page where I update folks about my artwork, my teaching at a university level, my neon sign designs, my watch designs, and all kinds of different art stuff. So if that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to head over to this URL, patreon.com/Ryan Claytor. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about who we are featuring here today, which is a fellow artist and creator, Kat Calamia. Kat is currently running a campaign for a comics anthology called Bi Visibility Volume 2, Still Bi. And I would really like to get a lot more eyes on this project. I think it's a really important comics project that's very near and dear to Kat's heart. But Kat is also a creator who wears many hats. So she is also a comics journalist who runs her own Comic Uno YouTube channel. She also has a number of different comics that she's writing in addition to comics in the Bi Visibility anthology. And we're going to talk about all of that. So without further ado, let's start this interview with Kat Calamia. All right, I'd like to welcome to the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast, Kat Calamia. Kat, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I'm really excited to talk with you about your wide and varied career in comics and also an exciting new project you have going on Kickstarter. By the time this airs, it will be live. So, Kat, hello and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we got to connect because I know we've been in similar circles. So it's cool that we're finally chatting. And I appreciate, you taking the time to talk about my projects.
Yeah, definitely. And in addition to sort of satelliting around one another in similar circles, I feel somewhat of a connection to you because in looking over your roster and getting to know you and your work a little better, you do a great many things. And I too feel like I have a hard time saying, this is the thing I do, because I make comics, but I also teach and I design neon signs and watches and everything else. So anyway, all that to say, I would like to step back for just a second at the beginning here and let you introduce yourself the way you would like it to be done.
Yeah, no, it's a long list. So I would say I'm mostly known for, I guess, two things. Doing YouTube for Comic Uno. I do comic book reviews, been doing it for over 10 years. So that's kind of how I started doing all of this. And then I started making comics about 5 years ago. Started with my superhero book, Like Father, Like Daughter. Then went into my martial arts book, They Call Her a Dancer. And now I write and edit and create Bi Visibility. So I'm one of the writers of Bi Visibility, a bisexual anthology. And then also a co-creator for webtoon Slice of Life. So I do that. I also do Kickstarter consulting. So I help people out on Kickstarter. I'm part of their official advisory council. What else do I do? I'm a journalist as well. So I've been doing comic journalism for a while and currently work for Read Pop for Pop First. So a lot of different hats.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where to start here, but
right?
So that we don't bury the lead, let's talk about the anthology you're putting together right now. It's called Bi Visibility Volume 2. You've done a Volume 1, of course, which super funded not even a year ago. So back in September 2021, you had over 1,300 backers bring this project to life to the tune of over $30,000, which is incredible. So first of all, congratulations on Volume 1. And you have what I would initially think is a healthy and lofty goal for Bi Visibility Volume 2 at 25K. Now, you and I are speaking before this project launches, just a couple of days before, but with those numbers from Volume 1, I would think that you're ready to go. But how are you? First of all, let's start out. Please tell me all about Bi Visibility Volume 2, and then I've got some other questions for you.
Yeah. Bi Visibility Volume 2 is a lead up to Volume 1. We don't need to read Volume 1 to understand what's going on with Volume 2. Volume one, we didn't know how good it was going to be. We didn't know how successful it would be. I know I heard whispers from friends saying, "Oh, I think this could be like very big for Kickstarter." One of my friends, Charlie Stickney, who's a publisher over at Scout, like he was especially saying, "Oh, I think it's going to be really good." And I'm like, he's had so many successful Kickstarters, so I was like, "Oh, or maybe if he's saying it, it will be." And it did really well. So it got, like you said, 1,300 backers. So it was just a no-brainer to do volume two, even if it didn't make that high numbers. Like even if it made like 500 backers, we probably still would do volume two, because we think it's an important topic. I am bisexual. There needs to be more representation. So we're happy to say that volume two is more than double the size. So we have even more stories than volume one, because now we know that people want it. Volume one was, again, just a test ground. We needed to make the budget reasonable, and now you can see the budget's a lot higher. The original budget for volume one was 10,000, and that's how much it made to make the book. Probably a little bit more when you put in shipping and all that. And then same for this. We put our budget together, and it's going to be about 25K to make the book. So and get a lot of copies out there. So yeah, we're super excited about this one. There's so many different genres, many different things touched upon that we didn't have a chance to in volume one. Like there's a trans character, there's more male driven stories, which is so interesting to say in comics, because usually it's like there's so many male driven stories, but when it comes to bisexuality, honestly, it's usually a lot from the female point of view. So we definitely wanted more of that. So we try to bring something new each volume.
Man, I have so many questions I want to dive into with you. Since you just touched on the fact that it seems as though there are more female-driven bisexual stories in comics, what makes you, why do you think that is the case? Why do you think we're not hearing more male-driven bisexual comic stories?
I mean, I think it's a good question. I think if I was a male, I'd be able to answer that more. But just from a female perspective, I think it's just like toxic masculinity.
Mhm.
We live in a straight driven world where if you could pretend to be straight, you probably can, right? Like if you're a bi man, maybe you're just more comfortable saying, I'm straight or whatever. I mean, you might not even know you're bi. So I think that's why you get less stories where I think women have been slightly been able to be a little bit more open about their bisexuality. I think there's just a lot of different layers to it for sure. I would have to ask a male bisexual person about their story, but that's at least what I would see. Why we get to see less of those stories, and why I want to particularly put a voice, because I think maybe men that are questioning their bisexuality could use this and be like, oh wait, I'm not straight, or I'm not gay, or they don't have to put a label at all. We have a story in in this anthology where it's about not having a label, and power of that, and that sexuality is fluid, and I think that's a big part of bisexuality as well.
Hmm. So one of the things I thought was really interesting about your thought process for putting together these anthologies was that this is something that you did not see growing up, that you felt like was needed in the world. And I'm hoping maybe you can talk about your story a little bit and how it, flowed into these couple anthologies you put out so far. The second one to come, but yeah.
Yeah, I just remember growing up that I always just thought, I always like kind of had a seesaw effect of like, oh, I must be gay because I like this girl, or like, oh, I must be straight because of this and that. Like there was just always this like, oh, I have to be one thing. Then I remember we're just watching like YouTube videos, probably in my early-ish 20s. I would say it's probably after college, which is kind of crazy to say. It was after college, and I was watching like these YouTubers, and I was always interested in like sexuality studies and things like that, but always thought I was straight. And I was like, oh, but I'm straight. I just like these things. But then I was like watching this YouTuber who's bi, and like her talking about her experiences of bisexuality, and then it just clicked. And
Mm.
it was like maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. I was watching this video, and that was the time where I was like, oh, that's what the label was this whole entire time. I didn't have to pick a side. I literally am just bi. And it's so weird to say it took that long, because obviously I knew like the label existed, but I didn't really know what it meant to be bi. And once I actually heard someone's experience with it, I was like, oh, that makes sense. So I wanted to do that with these anthologies, the things that I wish I had when I was younger. Maybe it wouldn't have taken me I don't want to say as long, because I don't think young 20s is that long, but or also it doesn't matter when you figure it out. But I think if it could be helpful to anybody, and I hope it is.
So did you ever reach out to that YouTuber and say, hey, that was pretty helpful? And conversely, have you ever had anybody read these anthologies and reach out to you with similar sentiments?
I never have reached out to that YouTuber, so that's interesting. I maybe one day should. But yeah, no, I've definitely had a lot of people reach out about the anthology. Mostly people saying that it just like it was great to see the representation. Mostly it's for people that knew they were bi. I don't think yet I've gotten someone say, "Oh, I figured out it was bi because of this." 'Cause I think if they're buying it, they probably have a have an idea. But yeah, no, it's been great feedback and just people saying, "Oh, I never see this representation." So it's been cool, and I still don't really see that representation that often. It's kind of crazy to think we're one of the few bi-centric books. Like,
Hmm.
it's crazy to think that this didn't happen before I launched it. We looked it up. I think maybe there's one or two on Kickstarter,
Hmm.
but they weren't in this size, and it's just kind of crazy that I was shocked no one came up with the idea before this.
Yeah, that is interesting. And you've also talked about the variety of stories in this anthology, and I've read yours. I got a sneak preview of that. I hope you don't mind if we chat about it a
Oh
little
yeah,
bit here.
no, go for it.
Um, and so it's about it's sort of a riff on The Bachelor, which I think is really fun and interesting because I used to watch that quite a bit with my mom when back when it started. And so I feel like I have kind of a connection to that initially, but then I really enjoyed the direction that you took it without giving anything away, but also I've noticed in your stories in both anthologies, volume 1 and volume 2, that you have a tendency to leave the stories pretty open-ended. And I can only assume that that's a conscious decision on your part to sort of spark conversation between people, or like, can you speak to that about your work a little?
Yeah, no, for sure. I love open endingness, which is interesting because I think for the stories I read, I like a good mixture. I wouldn't say it's like every movie or comic I read, like I want a cliffhanger, but I do love the idea of like the author is dead, like the death of the author. And I feel like that's what I try to bring with some of my stories. So like with the first one, which is already out, it's about this young girl who has this conversation with her mom about like, oh, can I come out as bi to my grandmother even though she has dementia? And I feel like that was very purposeful of why I left that open, because I don't know if everyone will get a clear answer for that, right? It was definitely a personal story to me too. At that moment, I didn't have a clear answer to that. Later on, I would, luckily, because that story kind of gave me the confidence to do that. But yeah, I just want to keep it open ended because like I want people to kind of write their own story of like how they think it would end in that if they're going through the same thing. And really the meat of that story, yeah, it is about the grandma, but it's about this mother-daughter relationship of how the mom sees sexuality and how there's these little tendencies in society of like of this like kind of passive aggressiveness of bi-erasure, because it's not like that in that dynamic the mom's not being biphobic, but in some way she is by like little comments she makes in that story. So that's kind of why I left that open ended. And then for this one, mostly it's just because like how can you tell a whole reality television show in 8 pages? So I'm like, if I wanted to tell a full story, I kind of had to keep it open ended because yeah, no, I think it would have been too rushed if I gave an answer there, because I wanted them to know the main character. So the main character is a guy, and the story is about him picking between a guy and a girl, the bachelor character and like one of the contestants, and that's kind of the full story. So I wish I had more time. Like I wish the anthology was 30 pages so I could tell this full story. I wanted everyone to get a gist of every character, and I had to do that in replacement of telling them who he ends up with. So and I think it fits for, I wanted it to be like a middle episode of The Bachelor. It wasn't going to be the season finale. It was like, all right, next time on The Bachelor, like I honestly I do so much research on reality television because I I know The Bachelor. I like seeing The Bachelor from the outside looking in. I've never seen a full episode of The Bachelor until I did research for this. It wasn't like I was a huge fan of it, but I liked Unreal, like the television show, and I like the culture of reality television a lot. And just something that really interests me. Yes, I'm the type of person to watch the Kardashians, but just mostly because I'm so like entertained by the actual entertainment that they bring, like the storytelling perspective of reality television, like why we watch it and why we consume it. And I really wanted to reverse engineer one of the most popular reality shows, which is The Bachelor, or something similar to The Bachelor, because those really are the most popular shows. And like why a queer person would like it, because The Bachelor is also a show where queer people love this show. And it's kind of like how straight people really love Drag Race. It just fascinates me. So that's something I wanted to kind of dig into as well.
So you talked about your interest in reality television. Why does reality television fascinate you so much?
I think because it just makes you shut off your brain. It's a craft. It's like comedy's a craft, right? Comedy, you wouldn't think it is, but there's just so many different rules you have to play, and everything's a craft, just like drama is, or acting, or whatever, or just cooking, or whatever. In reality television, there's a craft to it too, where you have to tell, some cliffhangers. You got to have just enough drama. But then you like if you watch Kardashians, and I watched the first episode recently, just like I haven't seen it since it first aired, and just like how different the show was, where it's just kind of more like YouTube vlogs, where YouTube vlogs has kind of replaced reality television in a lot of ways to actually have real reality television. But reality TV in general, it's just like you have to have a little drama, but then there's always this little quirky scene where they're like, trying to cut up strawberries and everything goes wrong. And those are things that is so interesting to me, and how you craft these characters and still how you engage people to watch the next episode. And I just think it's just such a, why do we love it? And I want to dig deeper into like, why the hell do we like these shows? And like, is it actually real? It's obviously not, but like, what do we see in ourselves when we watch them? Especially now you bring in YouTube to it as well, which is like this weird, like they're literally showing their lives, but then you also have to put a show on to it. So like, it's just so interesting to me, between like the blurred lines.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the craft. These episodes are very crafted. I mean, they're not
Mhm.
strictly reality. They are crafted reality to bring some sort of a narrative to something that doesn't have it, right? So
Mhm.
it's interesting to see how those are pieced together. Um, Speaking of YouTube, you also have a YouTube show, Comic Uno. Can you tell us a little bit about that briefly?
Yeah, so that's kind of how this thing all started when I was in high school. So I'm 27 now. So it was about 10 years ago. I wanted to talk about comics, and I remember I was on this website called Comic Vine, and there's the people that led the website. They did like video reviews, and we directly asked them. Me and my friend at the time doing videos, like, "Oh, how do you do this?" And they're like, "Just post some videos on YouTube." And I was like, "Okay." And then like every week, I just talk about my thoughts on comics, and then that kind of became my channel, was just talking about comics. Obviously, I crafted it in different ways, and I think priorities have changed. Like I there was definitely a time where I focused more on my YouTube channel. Now I enjoy it just as an outlet to talk about comics, for fun. I think it's great that people find enjoyment out of it, but it's very much a more of a hobby just because I do a lot of other things about comics, like my journalism and my actual publishing. That when I talk about weekly comics, it's just more fun, which is interesting because that kind of changed over the years.
So you say it's just a hobby, but this is still something you're keeping up weekly, right? Like
Yeah,
after
yeah,
a decade of doing it, is that right?
yeah. So it's still a weekly thing, and sometimes more than weekly, just because like it depends on the video I'm doing. I do my top 10 Kickstarter
Mhm,
of the month on there,
mm,
which does pretty well for the community, which I'm happy about.
mhm,
Happy to bring light to different Kickstarters. I do the weekly show where I talk about comics every week. But then I'll do like a top 10 most anticipated video, where I'll like review Young Justice every once in a while, because that was kind of what brought my channel back in the day to its height, was Young Justice,
mm.
actually. Because I think I was just one of the few people reviewing it. But yeah, no, it's hard to say it's a hobby, but when you compare it to other things, it's like I wish I could put more time and effort into it. Like if I had 100% effort into it, it'd be a very different channel.
Yeah.
So I could only put in as much effort as I can with
Oops.
the one body I have.
moves more to the hobby end of the spectrum than your other interests. I'm okay.
Exactly.
I get
Exactly.
it. But you've got 15,000 subscribers to your channel. So if folks have not watched Comic Uno, I'm going to link to it in the show notes of today's episode so that you can check out Kat on her YouTube station. So I have also created comics and run crowdfunding campaigns, and consequently, I might have some logistical questions for you.
Hey, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm all set.
So I want to get in your mind a little bit here. 2-3 days before you launch the campaign for a $25,000 ask,
Yes.
how you feeling?
It's so funny. I'm so happy that I have a business partner, because like if I was doing this all by myself, I think I'd be a little ants in my pants right now. But I literally just had a conversation with him today. If I didn't have COVID, I'd be at a party with him right now. But right before he had we was going to the party, we were just talking, and I was saying like, oh, how are we feeling about this campaign? Like, we're a few days out. Is there anything we want to do? And we're like we're like 320 followers away, or we're about 320 followers on the pre-launch page. We're like, you know what? We're all good. We're all set. Because we did do a previous campaign for buy visibility with just pins, and it was kind of new. And we got like 150 backers, and we're like, oh, it did decently. And we obviously funded and all that, but we were expecting a little bit more just because of the buy visibility brand. But then it was like, oh, it was just such a different thing. So that's the only thing that got us anxious. It's like, oh, we did the pins, and we expected a little bit more backers than that, but we also have 1,300 on the comic. We do really well with Slice of Life. That was a good follow up to it with the queer stuff we're doing. So there's always going to be a little anxiety, but I'm pretty good, honestly. I feel like we set up really well for it. We reached out to a few outlets, which I normally don't do with most of my books, but if it's something like specific like buy visibility where it's a little more sellable to an outlet, I'll reach out, and I have a couple of press friends that I did that for. And that's it really. I mean, you put the word out, you tell the people that need to be told that the Kickstarter is happening, and you let it ride, and you put all the work into it. And we've been doing this since Christmas, that we've been putting this book together. It's actually all done, which is really cool. But it's hard to determine that date of when you're shipping everything because of the printer problem. So it's weird to say everything's done, but we have to print it, and shortage. So we're giving us a lot of time after to say, hey, this is when you're going to get your book, which we're most likely going to get it to much before that, but we want to be safe. Be like, this is when you're getting it. So I think we're very prepared. I don't like releasing Kickstarters unless my book's almost done, and I'm so happy the book's actually completely done, which makes things so much easier for us, and it makes us so much happier. And yeah, no, we do this like once a month at this point now, Kickstarters. So it's just a cog in the machine. I mean, I think it's always like the day before you're a little nervous, but it's not like the old days where I was like, oh my god. Now it's just like, okay, we've done this before.
Yeah, you talked about sending out some press releases and doing some conversations about it beforehand. I saw on Kurt Sasso's Twitter that he was chatting with you on Two Geeks Talking. I chat with Kurt for my Kickstarter as well. He's a great guy. Hey Kurt, thank you.
Great interview too. Like, he's great at talking. He's good.
Yeah, he really gets some thought-provoking questions too. He really made me
As you
stop in
do
my
as well.
tracks. Yeah. And really think for a while, like, oh gosh, what do I think about that? So anyway, also thank you for your kind words there. So my question, all that to say, was where are you reaching out to as far as promotional outlets to let people know about this new anthology? I mean, I'm certain that I am not your biggest media outlet. So where are you reaching out to?
Yeah, so CBR has been really great to us. They've posted a lot of our stuff.
That's
I
great.
have a couple of friends there. So we CBR, Bleeding Cool. Mary Sue did for the first volume. What else did we get? Comic Watch, I believe. Comics Beat, we have Comic Book Yeti, things like that. Sci-Fi did a press release. Trying to think who else did it. There's a Autostraddle, which is actually a queer outlet, posted for us to. I think Book Riot did, maybe when we had the submissions form, they did it. So we had a lot for volume one. This one, we did a few, just because as a journalist myself, I kind of know what's going to get picked up and what's not. And comics it's just a hard, Kickstarters especially. It's so interesting when I try to give advice to people who are like, well, I got to go to every outlet. I'm like, it depends on what you're doing. Like, unless you have like a buy visibility is a little, it's about bisexuality. Like, it's not my story about a princess that goes to space. Like, a princess that goes to space is probably not going to get the media outlet. It's more because a bisexual story is getting an anthology. So that's why I'm like, oh, I'll push for this. More than, like, they call her dancer. I never do press for the dancer unless someone asks me, because I'm like, well, it's just not what's going to end up getting pressed. Like, Marvel and DC has a hard enough time like getting interviews sometimes for like on websites, just because it depends on what the outlet is trying to do, what their outlet. It's just like comic outlets are not about reviews anymore. They don't get as many hits. It's more about like the features. It's more about like, if they're going to talk about Kickstarter, they're going to talk about like, oh, this is what Kickstarter means in the modern day, blah blah, and they'll do a feature about it, because that's going to get more clicks than check out my Princess That Goes to Space comic. Because they need to make money too, and they need to get clicks. So with Buy Visibility Volume 2, it's a Volume 2, so it's a little harder to get press. So I just went to the places like I had friends, or I knew maybe they'd cover it. So I definitely did a little less than Volume 1, but we still wanted to do a little bit. We have another anthology coming out that we're going to do more full force, because it's a new anthology. It's a hair anthology. So also kind of has a societal edge to it. So I think it could get some coverage. But yeah, that's like what's so hard, because like even with my clients, when I talk about consulting, that's like a number one question. It's like, well, how do I get coverage? I'm like, I wouldn't waste your time, because a lot of times, even when you do get coverage, like, it's great to have, but mostly it's about building your fan base. It's mostly about building relationships within Kickstarter than you trying to go to, IGN, like, because they're not the Kickstarter audience unless you're Keanu Reeves, and then they're going to go to Kickstarter. So you have a better bet and better energy to spend interacting with people on Kickstarter and getting to know people than going to an outlet and trying to get your press release there.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the benefits or lack thereof regarding press releases, getting press for your books, for your Kickstarters, and really developing an audience. So I'm sure you're aware of the myriad of different Kickstarter alternatives coming to the market through BackerKit, through Zoop, through, you can name them, on more than two hands at this point, it seems like. Do you have any worry that by developing relationships through folks at Kickstarter, that if people move to different platforms, then you're going to have to rebuild those relationships? What are your thoughts about that?
I feel like comics in general is all about relationships. So if somebody is working on a direct market book and you're doing a Kickstarter book, it doesn't mean that you guys don't have a relationship. It doesn't mean that you guys can't help each other, because maybe I'll do a direct market push and maybe that person wants to do Kickstarter. So I don't think it means that they have more experiences that you can learn from. So I don't think it affects relationship at all. I think it builds bridges to more relationships.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're pretty invested in Kickstarter if you have taken a position as on the board of creator. I'm sorry, I'm losing the title in my head. Can you remind me of
the advisory community board, I believe.
The advisory community board? Okay, thank you. So for those who don't know, essentially Kickstarter put out a call to creators and said, hey, if you want to have some input on Kickstarter, I think this is not something Kat told me. This is Ryan Claytor's perception. But after they made this announcement of looking into blockchain, they got a lot of flack for that. And it felt like Kickstarter was trying to like regain some trust from the community, from the creative community, and say, hey, we do value your opinion. So let's form this board to talk about this. And I understand that you are not able to talk about this. So I will not ask you questions.
But I will say it's been a great experience thus far, and I love working with everybody there. And yeah, I will say that it's definitely I do need to keep mum's the word on most of it, but yeah, no, I think it's great that Kickstarter is doing it, and I very much feel like my voice is being heard, and just super excited to work with them. I've always enjoyed the community and staff at Kickstarter, and to get to like see them face to face now and truly form an even bigger relationship has been monumental for sure.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that you are having a good experience with that. I so want to know more, but I'm going to respect your NDA or whatever's happening that you can't talk about this. I will ask one question though. Is there a point in time at which we could talk about your experience on this advisory board?
I don't know if I could I could say anything. I'm not sure, and I'm going to keep mom's word on that for now. I don't
Okay.
know if that's something I could say.
Okay, no problem. Cool. So yeah, I feel like there's so many directions we could go in, but I do want to keep this focused on Buy Visibility Volume 2. So I did have a question with regard to when you are launching your campaign, which is in June, June 21st through July 21st, 2022. Am I correct in those dates?
Yes, July. Yeah, so I think it ends. I don't even know. We launched the 21st, so yeah, I believe it's gonna be 21st or 22nd that we end.
Okay. So you've got a June launch, which is
Yes.
Pride Month. Was that intentional,
Yeah,
or
for
was there
sure.
just sort of a confluence of enough stories and a finishing of the anthology that happened to be in this month? Like how?
Oh no, we made that very intentional. So
Okay.
the first volume we actually launched in September because that's uh bi month, so bisexual. I think it's a week maybe, and there's a day, so not even a month. It's like a day and a week. So we wanted to line it up with Bi Visibility Day. So that was the first one we did, and then when that was done, we knew we wanted to do a second volume, and we had time to think about, okay, well, how long is it going to take to make the comic, blah blah. And we just lined it up to start when we knew we could make the Kickstarter for June. So yeah, no, it was very intentional. Actually, it was supposed to be the beginning of June, and then I had a cruise, and then luckily I had a week in between because I got COVID. And then we're launching now. So as I recover, we're gonna launch the Kickstarter. But yeah, it actually timed very well. But we still are in Pride Month. That's why I was like, oh, it's fine if we push a week or two, because we wanted to be in Pride Month, and we made it work out. So it's a little later than we wanted, but by like a week, so a week or two.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. And Kat, you've been mentioning the fact that you got COVID. Kat and I have a little conversation about this before we started recording, but just so that folks know, you are doing well. You are.
I am. I'm alive. But yeah, I'm getting over it. So I'm in the end of the hill. So it's more of like precaution that I'm not going anywhere, because I'm like pretty good, but I'm like, let's wait a day or two to be in
Sure.
quarantine to keep everybody safe. So
Yeah.
been in quarantine. That's been fun. But yeah, no, it wasn't ever really. Obviously there's been a lot worse cases, and I've been lucky. My family honestly had a little worse than I did. They're still like kind of recovering from it. Now I'm like, I think by tomorrow I'll be 100%. If not, definitely Monday. Like I still sound a little nasally, but other than that, I feel okay. So
Well, you're
luckily.
jumping on podcasts and interviews and doing
Exactly.
quite well. So
I
I'm
gave you
glad
a
to hear
fair
you're doing all
warning.
right.
I
Yeah.
gave you a fair warning when we were messaging, because I was like in the height of my COVID when I was talking to you. I was like, maybe by Tuesday or Saturday, whatever day it is. I was like, oh, I don't know, man, I'm a little sick.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I think I'll be better by then. And luckily, like yesterday, I was feeling, even the day before, I was feeling better. So I was like, all right. And I was like, a fair warning you. I was like, I might have to move it, just letting you know, but I know I'm
Totally.
free because
Yeah.
I'm doing absolutely nothing. So
Oh man. Well, I'm glad we could make this happen. It's been really good chatting with you and getting to know you better, and hopefully putting your project in front of some more eyes. I really hope that we can direct some more folks to your campaign that is live now as of this release. So with that said, is there anything else that I did not ask you that you want to talk about, or, use this platform to tell folks about?
I know. I think you did a great job. I mean, just to kind of go 360 again. You got the Kickstarter showing up on Tuesday. Slice of Life is published every week on Webtoon. So if you're looking for content on a weekly basis, you like queer content, it's a romance about an anime character who comes to life and falls in love with a high school cheerleader. So it's a lot of fun. Me and my co-writer created that. Should also give a shout out that he's also an editor on this book, and his sibling's also an editor on this book. And it's been this wouldn't be possible without them. So this book is like 30 plus people made it. It's not just me. So I want to give a round of applause and also shout to all those people that made this book possible. And yeah, that's pretty much what's going on. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Uno if you want like any information and stuff, because we're doing Kickstarters all the time. I think after By Visibility, a few weeks after, I'll have another Kickstarter. So we're planning out all our Kickstarters up until the new year, and then we're gonna be at Comic Cons like all summer. So it's good that I got COVID now, because like July starting, I think Terrificon to like end of August, we got Comic Cons every week. So we have so many Comic Cons. We're gonna be at Pride, New York City Pride. That's gonna be our next thing. That's Sunday. Literally so lucky because next Sunday is gonna be that. So I got that, and we have a Long Island convention. We got a lot going on. So Twitter is the best place to find all that information.
So what you're telling me is you're just kind of loafing around these days, right?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Just twiddling my thumbs.
So Kat mentioned Slice of Life, which is her webtoon series, and let's go ahead and put a note to that, a link to that in the show notes of today's episode, and also Kat's Twitter account, and anything else you want me to put in the show notes, please let me know, Kat. You can message me afterward and I'll include it. So until then, thank you so much for joining me here on the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. This has been so good, finally connecting with you, and I can't wait to share this with more people.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This was amazing.